We'll get started in about a minute, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us. Want to try to make sure that you guys get out on time as well. We will not keep you past the hour that we allocated for the workshop. So okay, I've got 10 o'clock on my watch, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Anyone who joins us in progress can certainly do that, and hopefully they will get something out of the workshop as well. So just as it means by a brief introduction, my name is Neil Benedict. I am based out of Houston, Texas. We run a business growth advisory firm here that does consulting, coaching, and sales training. We train in the Sandler sales methodology, and we've been doing that now for a few years. So we are actively engaged with people in regards to things like prospecting, and a critical tool that is even more important now than it was prior to March is the idea of working the phones and cold calling effectively. So we spend a lot of time helping people understand what that ought to look like for their business. We spend a lot of time engaging them on both the behaviors and the attitudes related to cold outreach, as well as giving them the techniques to use to be more effective. I think going into the seminar, keep in mind that every business is unique, and we understand that every business has its own nuances to it, and every business is not a perfect fit for full-blown cold calling. So everything we say here is going to be along the lines of generalized speak related to cold calling. So again, if it doesn't apply immediately to you, look for some best known method or some relatability to your business, because again, we do realize that not everybody is in the same business and has the same challenges. I also wanted to introduce Mr. Leo Toledo, who's on the phone, who's a colleague of mine. I was mentioning before most of you joined, he really is the Michael Jordan of cold calling. And again, he's not the Michael Jordan who got cut from his 9th grade basketball team. He's the real Michael Jordan. After he and the reason I say that is because, and one of the things that he'll admit to you is that the reason why is that he's maniacal in cold calling, much like Michael Jordan was maniacal in the practice that he was doing on a regular basis. Cold calling at its core is really a discipline and a skill, and unless you're working on practicing A/B testing and really trying to develop that skill set, you never will. So Leo is really good at it because he spends lots of time doing it, and lots of time testing it, and lots of time refining it. So that's why he's here. And we're actually going to do a little bit of a role play session, a couple role play sessions for you guys, so you can hear what he does in his business and how we like to approach it. So that being said, welcome everybody. We look forward to taking this next 56 minutes with you, or next 58 minutes with you, and hopefully giving you guys a bit more insight into cold calling. And if you think about what we're trying to do, we're really trying to get you guys thinking about it from an attitudinal standpoint. We were talking again a little bit before most people joined, and everybody talks about cold calling in sales, and there's a lot of different discussions about how to do that effectively and what the ultimate end goal of a cold call is. But regardless of where you fit on that spectrum, most people do talk about cold calling a lot, but almost never do it effectively and never do it consistently enough. So when you leave this call today, hopefully what you'll be thinking about is, what attitudes and behaviors do I need to take forward? We're going to give you a little bit of technique, but that's not really the important part anyway. The real important part coming from this seminar, this workshop, is going to be, what attitudes and behaviors do I need to establish for myself to be able to effectively pick up the phone, engage people, for the right reasons and with the right outcomes in mind. So that's what we'll focus on heavily today. And again, I thank you guys for joining, because I know you guys could be spending time elsewhere versus here. So I appreciate you deciding to spend an hour here with us. So questions, just a little housekeeping before we get started. Questions, please use the chat, because that way, I'll be able to see them a little bit more easier. As you guys know, when you run these webinars, a lot of times you're focused on the content. focused on the discussion, not so much on, the chats. But if you use the chat, I'll be able to pull it up and be able to see your questions live at that point. I've got you guys on mute by default for those of you who haven't heard that, but you can unmute yourself if you say, hey, pause, time out. If you really need to get a question out that you think is relevant for the group, don't hesitate to do that. But if you do it via chat, it'll be more effective. Participate in the polls. I've got 2 or 3 polls here for you guys to take. I'll give you 17 seconds to complete each of the polls. And so it's not a real in-depth thing, but I'd love for you guys to participate just so we can see the numbers. And then take one thing away from the seminar, right? From the workshop. Don't necessarily have to take everything away from it. You don't have to necessarily buy into everything that we're saying to do. You don't necessarily have to try to, duplicate or emulate anything we're doing. And I know you know that, but try to take at least one thing away from it and start practicing it. The information unused really doesn't add any value to your life. It doesn't add any value to your sales. So try to take at least one thing away. Try to use that one thing. Try to practice it wherever you can, and refine it, right? And if you get one thing out of any webinar, I think that's a big success, and I'll be happy with that. So again, think about it as you get through the content and say, yeah, that's the one thing that I think was valuable for me, and that's the upfront contract for today's webinar. So, think about it. I think one of the things, that you guys might want to be thinking about as you get into this, why are you here, right? We were talking to Nate a little bit earlier, and he was talking about his business, and, they're a well-established company. They don't do a lot of cold calling today, but maybe they're going to pick that up in the future and do a little bit more as they're trying to tackle new markets. I think one of the challenges we all have going into an unknown fourth quarter and maybe into an unknown first and second quarter of next year is where do we spend our time? Where do we focus as salespeople? What behaviors do we need to do, and ultimately be able to pull ourselves out of what is largely for a lot of people been a COVID-19 spiral. There's been lots of headwinds for salespeople. Some of our businesses have done okay, but nonetheless, most of us as salespeople have struggled with maintaining a fairly active pipeline because of all the delayed projects, all the slow decision making, all the sit back, wait and sees that are going on in the industries that we focus on. And one of the ways we can get people off center, one of the ways we can have active conversations, one of the ways we should be engaging with people, because it's the quickest, fastest, and in most, the ability to generate the most interest is really when you start conversations. If you think about what we do as salespeople in general, we're really only ever making money when we're in conversations with people. And you might say, well, an email is a conversation. Yeah, it is, but it doesn't really have that ability to go back and forth and ask the questions. Questions can be easily ignored via email, for example. And as you guys know, selling is really a question asking discipline. It's not a talking discipline or a presenting discipline at its core. So we need to think about ways we need to engage people, and the phone and talking to people and engaging them is really important. And you can't do, if we could do Zoom cold calls, that might be interesting. Sure, someone's developing that technology, but you really can't do that to date. So the phone is still our single best tool to be able to engage with people and have conversations. And that's when and why we make money as salespeople. So why are you here? What's most important to you to get out of today's session? I think one of the things I always think about is, if I could take one thing away, what if I could do that one thing, what it would mean to me, what it would mean to my business, what it would mean to, my organization, and we're in sales. So what does it mean to my income, right? So what if I did these things differently? And then what must happen for me to do it, right? Sometimes, if all of a sudden you come out of this session and you want to be making more cold calls, well, it just doesn't happen, right? You have to plan it into your day. You have to schedule the time to be able to do it. Some of you are working from, relatively well-defined talk tracks. Some of you are not. So the idea would be you'd have to establish a talk track to be able to be effective in doing your cold calling, because it's much more about, it's much more important to be able to plan and execute calls than just picking up the phone, right? We have to know what we're going to say. We're going to have to know what we want that outcome to be, and we're going to have to engage the client and find somebody who has an interest in what it is we're doing. And you can do research. And Nate again was pointing out the idea of doing a little bit of research before the calls, which is good. Absolutely, we'd never argue against research. However, most salespeople, if you're working on the right end of the problem, most salespeople are doing far too much research and far too little outreach, right? So if you're struggling with making too many calls and not enough research, God bless you. But that's not really where most salespeople end up, and it's really not the end of the problem that we're going to be focusing on right today. So again, think about the things. What's most important to you? What if I could do these things, and what do I really need to do? What's got to happen for me to be better at outreaching and making calls? And I think if you set that in your mind as we get going, I think you'll be thinking about your own situation as individuals as we talk through the content here versus versus thinking about us and what we're trying to describe to you. So let's do a poll here, if you guys don't mind. I'm gonna kick this initial poll off. I'm gonna launch it. Let me know if you guys don't see it. But the first poll really is the question: I believe cold calling can be effective to generate leads. And here's the reason why we're asking this question, right? If you come to this and you don't think that cold calling is going to help you, and you don't believe in it, and you don't think it's going to be effective, then you really need to shift that mindset, right? You need to really get that head trash out of your mind and start talking to yourself about the benefit of doing cold outreach. And the phone still works. Now, people are picking up the phone a little less today, but the numbers aren't dramatically different than they were, even 10 years ago. About 80% of calls go to voicemail. So cold calling has to involve some level of voicemail response, right? It has to involve some level of engagement from a voicemail standpoint. There are good voicemails and there are not so good voicemails. So we'll talk a little bit about that later in the call. But if you don't believe that cold calling is going to impact your business, then you're going to be struggling to make sure that you've got the right mindset moving forward. So again, we're going to be talking about that, but I wanted to get a sense of where you guys land on the spectrum of feeling that, again, cold calling is beneficial. So we've got about 67% of you guys, we don't have a huge audience, but 67% of you guys agree. 22% of you guys are really bought into the idea, and then about 11% are not sure. So I think we're okay with the not sures. But hopefully, if we were to ask you this poll at the end, which we won't, we'll see more people who are at least in the mostly agree and the amen category. So thanks for submitting that. I appreciate it. So let's talk a little bit about cold calling stats. I think I might have, mentioned before about, 80% of your calls are going to go to voicemail. That's why we've got to, hit that topic later on. But, only about 27% of cold reps believe that cold calling is extremely effective today. And, I think if any of you guys have ever read Jeb Blount's book, for an example, Fanatical Prospecting, which I would highly recommend if you guys are in a heavy prospecting business, he talks about, and he talks about this a lot, that nobody picks up a phone call that isn't, nobody picks up a phone that doesn't ring, right? So I think, a lot of reps are in a self-defeating cycle related to cold calling. They'll do a little bit of it. It doesn't, turn out exactly the way they want. And then, of course, they come to the conclusion that cold calling doesn't work. And then they stop picking up the phone. And then they realize that their pipelines are anemic, small, not growing. And then they look at cold calling again and they try it and it doesn't work. Again, it's this endless cycle of, really not investing your time and resources into becoming good at it and doing the right things related to cold calling, and hence it's not an effective tool. So again, that's why I think a large group of salespeople don't really see it as being a very important tool in their arsenal of prospecting. High performance sales reps are greater than 90% over quota over 6 quarters. This is data that came out from, I think, Close.io. And so they make a higher number of average cold calls a day than their average reps that aren't making those cold calls. So, and these are not distinct amongst inside or outside reps. I mean, cold calls are just as important for people that are sitting behind the computer screen, which is most of us these days by default. But also, of course, outside sales reps have to be able to make cold calls as well. And these are via phone, obviously, not in-person cold calls. But those of you used to do in-person cold calls, see the effectiveness there as well. High performers average 6.6 calls per day. That means those are calls that actually end up getting somebody on the phone, right? Those are calls that are actually engaging with somebody. Those are calls that are actually as a result of the calling campaigns that they're engaged in. So, they're having more conversations in general with people than people that aren't obviously picking up the phone, and they're just trying to get people via email, or they're just trying to connect with them on social media like LinkedIn. You can get meetings that way. You should be trying to get meetings that way. You should be trying to get engagement that way, but it's not enough. 92% of customer interactions happen via the phone, meaning that a lot of you're going to have to pick up the phone and talk to somebody eventually, right? you're going to eventually have to engage them in a conversation voice to voice, particularly during this time frame. And that means that people are going to be having phone calls, right? And if you looked at even prior to COVID, they did lots of surveys on decision makers and how they prefer to interact with salespeople, particularly for the first, or second call. And it's over 70% of the respondents said that they would rather interact with a salesperson initially via the phone. So when you're calling people and you're engaging them via a phone-based platform, that's what your clients are looking for as well. So there's some alignment there on people that are making calls and the people that are picking those up, right? People that have really stopped doing cold calling in general have seen the negative impact, right, of that overall strategy. So people that have stopped using the phone are really seeing a significant decline in their overall sales revenue. And this data was gathered pre-COVID as well. So if you think about the COVID situation, if people have been reticent, if people have been concerned about making calls, if they've really struggled to make outbound calls during this process, this number would even be higher. It would be a bigger and more significant impact to businesses if they stop calling since March. So keep that in mind as well. And then, like I said, buyers generally prefer an initial point of contact, which is calls, right? Other contacts split via. Doesn't mean you can't, if you're doing sequencing, for an example, doesn't mean that first sequence can't be a email. That first step in your sequence can't be an email. Doesn't mean that first step in your sequence can't be a LinkedIn connection. Doesn't mean that first step in your sequence can't be a snail mail postcard with your business card in it. All those things, can certainly be the initial point in your sequence. But if you don't add phone to that, and if you aren't using your phone as an initial point of sequence, you're kind of missing out on some of the benefits of that initial voice-to-voice communication. So that being said, hey, Leo, do you want to jump on a role play at this point? Do you want to do a cold call role play for the folks here?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So Leo's going to be, here's the scenario set up. We're going to be a service-based company. At this point, we're going to be offering, I think we've got a number of folks from, security services on the phone. So why don't we do that, Leo? You're a sales rep selling security services, event security, and that type of thing. And you're cold calling me as one of the large event organizers in the city of Houston, and you're trying to understand whether or not I'm a buyer of event security. Make sense?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So ring. I guess I'm picking up the phone. How you doing, Leo? Or hello.
Yeah, Neil Benedict.
Yeah.
Leo Toledo.
Hi, Leo.
Hey, listen, Neil, I'm just doing my prospecting calls. We don't know each other. If I can just take a few moments of your time to tell you why I called, and you can tell me if it makes sense to continue a further conversation. Does that sound reasonable?
What is it you do, Leo? What's your company?
Yeah. So is it okay if I just tell you in a brief moment why I called?
Okay.
Yeah, so listen, thanks. I appreciate that. So I own a company that does security services, and at this moment, you guys probably don't have any events going on, do you?
Oh man, we've been hit hard by events as of late. Most people aren't doing much of anything at this point, but yeah.
Right. And so if I were to tell you that I provide security services and, we take care of protecting all of your events or any of your buildings, anything that you guys have as assets, that probably wouldn't be of any interest to you, would it?
Well, it's certainly of interest. I mean, it's certainly, we've hired firms like yours in the past, but, and our events are starting to come back a little bit. We're starting to see, obviously, the political season, which is active, and people trying to, schedule things around that. But and we're starting to see some of the trade shows actually look like they're coming back on the calendar, of course, with social distancing in mind. I don't know exactly how they're going to do that, but yeah, they're starting to come back. But yeah, we already, I mean, honestly, we already use a security company that we're pretty comfortable with.
Sure. And so if there's one thing that they can do better for you, what would that be?
Wow. I mean, I don't know. We're pretty comfortable. I don't know if there's, anything, maybe they could, be a bit less expensive. They seem pretty expensive usually.
Hmm. And usually that ties into the value that you're getting, right?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I think they've raised their prices a bit over the last couple of years, and I don't know what else we're paying for.
Hmm. Right. So then it probably doesn't make sense for you and I to probably schedule a 10-minute call of how you can perhaps consider us as another resource.
I don't know. What do you charge? What's your pricing look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I don't even know that I can be a fit just yet. I mean, I guess my question would be, does it make sense on our brief conversation to us extend this further?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you can't be cheaper, I don't know if that's really a good, if you can't be cheaper than they are, I guess, I don't know. Does it make sense to talk?
Hmm. Right, because when you guys go out to bid, you're the cheapest one. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
You mean not when we go to bid event services?
Yep.
Oh, no, we're not, we're seldom not the cheapest.
Hmm. And so then when the event coordinator asks you to lower your price for your services, you say, okay, fine, here you go.
Mm, some of our sales team does, but no, we try to tell them not to, of course.
Hmm. And you're okay with that?
No, no, it's a big issue for us. We certainly have to, we certainly have to make sure that we're pricing effectively. And when the sales team just drops their price, it's a problem.
Hmm. And so, but that's probably not something that you want to discuss further, or you're okay with the low margins that you're currently receiving?
No, I mean, we're not okay with it, but like I said, you know, um, if you had the ability to offer us a, better price, it'd probably be more interesting to have a meeting with you.
Hmm. Right. But maybe I can't come in at a lower price. I mean, listen, even before we talk about price, why don't we just schedule perhaps 15 minutes? And then, you can have some questions laid out for me and what I do and how our company operates. And equally, I'll have some questions for you about, what you look for in a vendor. And at the end of that conversation, really one of two things can happen. One is that you say, Leo, thank you for the call and our schedule. This is not something that I'm interested in. So I guess my question to you would be, Neil, if that's the case, would you be comfortable telling me, Leo, no, thank you for your services?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be comfortable with that. I mean, I think it may make sense to have a conversation with you, but yeah, I'd be comfortable talking with you. I can just tell you that it's probably going to be hard for us to justify anything that isn't, less expensive.
Hmm. Yeah, I know you keep bringing that up, Neil, and I mean, frankly, I'm not even sure why you keep it up because I don't really know anything about what you look for in a vendor, and frankly, I don't even know if I could offer my services to you because obviously we're very busy. So I guess before we go that far, does it make sense for us to carry that conversation?
Sure, sure. I think it makes sense.
Okay. And listen, I appreciate that. And also, if I feel that I can't add any value to to your company and to your event, and obviously if we can't match the criteria that you're looking for, certainly I'll be able to tell you, listen, Neil, thanks for the opportunity. I can't help you. Or listen, on the other hand, we both might agree that maybe your existing vendor is dropping the ball in several items, and if it does make sense to probably engage, I think we'll both come to that conclusion at the end of our call. Does that sound okay with you?
Yeah, I think that sounds fair.
Hmm. All right. Well, then, I mean, I know today is Monday, and listen, I appreciate you receiving my call today. What do you think? Maybe towards the end of this week, we can dial in for 15 minutes?
Yeah, I think Friday's probably a good day for me. I can do
Okay,
something on Friday.
sure. Now, listen, Neil, I appreciate that. Obviously, I'm a blind voice over the phone. We really don't know each other. So, just the fact that you're giving me 15 minutes, I certainly appreciate that. If anything comes up between now and then, will you be comfortable to tell me, look, Leo, I'm sorry, I can't do it? Because I certainly don't want to have you commit if you're really not ready to commit.
Yeah, if you send me a meeting invite, I'll certainly put it on my calendar and then I'll let you know if I can't make it.
Sure. All right. Well, very good, Neil. Well, thank you for your time, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks, Leo.
Bye now.
Okay, good. Out of role play. So Leo, maybe we'll just do a brief debrief for a second. Tell me a little bit more about, the call, why you did it in the way that you did. What were you working on?
Yeah, it's a good point. So, I mean, typically what I like to do is when I start my cold call, I first have to tell the person I'm calling why I called, right? Because if I just say, "Oh, hi Neil, how are you doing today?" Obviously, depending on your disk profile, you can be really caught off and because I interrupted you. And so, who is this guy calling me, or who is this gal calling me, interrupting me? So immediately I have to say, "Hey, listen, I'm just doing my prospecting calls. Let me introduce to you why I interrupted your phone. And then you can tell me after I give you my brief description as to why I called, if it does make sense for us to continue a further conversation." So at least I basically introduce the reason why I called, and I
Mhm.
get his input before I engage with the commercial.
We talk about, yeah, it's a good point. We talk about a little bit about pattern interrupts. Is that when you say to the client or the prospect, "Hey, I'm just doing my prospecting calls," is that what you consider a pattern interrupt? Does it make them say, "Oh," because most people wouldn't say that, right? Most salespeople don't
Right.
call and say that, right? So it's a bit of a
Yeah,
pattern interrupt.
it's a pattern interrupt. And honestly, what I'm doing is I'm just being upfront and I'm being authentic. Look, I'm obviously calling you, I'm interrupting you. This is a prospecting call. Maybe it makes sense for you, maybe it doesn't. Let me share with you why I called.
Got it. Okay. And then, feel free, anybody who has any questions to put them in the chat, by the way. But as far as I was hitting on pricing pretty heavily, and I'm guessing some people are, on the call get the same type of feedback, right? Hey, can you do something cheaper for me, right? I'll talk to you if maybe you can get me a little bit lower price. Again, I don't know if people on the phone hear that much, but a lot of times prospects will go there, particularly if you're in a business that or particularly now where people are trying to reduce costs and expenses. What was your thinking when I kept going to pricing?
Yeah, that's another very interesting point, because as soon as you brought up price, I have to figure out, okay, where did that suggestion of price even come from? Are you experiencing that in your world? And even more importantly, when you offer your services, are you the lowest price? Because what happens is that as soon as I start to justify, explain, or defend on why, or perhaps I could be lower, essentially I'm just losing. I'm losing because I'm admitting that I have some type of concession. I have flexibility. I should not initiate flexibility just because someone asks me, give me a price. I have to fall back and say, well, I mean, wait a second, why do you keep bringing this up? I'm confused. And then that'll give you the opportunity to explain yourself why you brought it up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Got it. Well, good. Everyone can. Good call, Leo. Thanks for kind of demonstrating the pattern interrupt and getting to the meeting, and also comment before we head on. Just a second. I know we don't have lots of time, but when you describe what you were doing sort of at the end of the call to make sure that he knew that I knew what the conversation was going to look like the next time we met.
Yeah, so there I was really just establishing the upfront contract and the ground rules, because one of the challenges that we have, that we share in our Sanser program, is that no mutual mystification or no mind reading. Okay, so for example, if Neil, you and I are going to have a phone call in 4 days from now, why are we going to be having that conversation? What's the purpose of our conversation in 4 days? What's going to be the agenda, right? Because obviously you're going to have some expectations on what you like to accomplish on that call. And similarly, I'm going to have the same type of agenda that I like to accomplish on the call. Now, we're going to have separate questions, and after we exchange those questions, we're going to arrive at, okay, now what? So then the now what could be, you decide it's not going to work, I decide it's not going to work, or we both agree that it is going to work, and then we both create a game plan as to what it looks like moving forward. So I'm
Got it.
setting up the parameters or the structure of what our call is going to be when we have that call in 4 days from now.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. Perfect. Well, like I said, anybody who has any questions, keep pinging them in the chat box. But in the meantime, I'm going to pop up. Well, thanks, Leo. That was great. I'm going to pull up the second poll
You're welcome.
and let you guys answer this if you might. So This poll is really, even though I don't like calling, I do it, right? I wanted to get a sense of how many of you are actually making cold calls on a regular basis. And okay, it's great to be honest here. I mean, and a lot of times, we'll find ourselves tucking ourselves into things that we did that we actually didn't do. So so just if you can just let me know, how much cold calling you're actually doing at this point, and it'll help us actually talk a little bit more about why that means, or what that means for us for the remainder of the time. So it looks like about half of you guys do cold calls on most of your days, and about half of you, or a little bit more than half, almost never make any cold calls. So I don't know if that is in result of your business model, and hopefully, hopefully you guys will see some of the benefits of adding that to your business model if you're not doing it today. And if you have specific questions related to your business model, and if it makes sense for your client base, don't hesitate to populate them in the chat. We'll try to address them. But hopefully you're not making cold calls, mostly because you just didn't prior to this call, either you didn't have the belief that they work, or you were technically struggling with how to do it effectively. So those are the real two. Most problems fit into both categories, right? They're conceptual and they're technical. So if conceptually you don't believe that they work, you're not going to do it. And if technically you don't know how to do it well, then you're gonna migrate and do things to do things that you do well. So again, those are two ends of the problem that we're working on today: the conceptual and the technical. So, but thanks for doing the poll. But again, about half and half, you guys are doing them on a regular basis. So, good. Let me talk a little bit about the call reluctance part of things, right? So. We talked a little bit about the conceptual problem, and most people struggle. The primary reason that salespeople, struggle, to make calls is this idea of call reluctance, right? And call reluctance are really the thoughts, attitudes, and avoidance behaviors that keep us from doing the underlying activity, right? And it's not only, it doesn't only, in sales, it doesn't only relate to call reluctance itself, because we've got thoughts, attitudes, and avoidance behaviors in a lot of different areas of things that we end up not doing, right? But call reluctance is really prevalent among most salespeople. And again, I think it relates back to those two larger buckets of problems that we talk about, both the conceptual and the technical. So, so a lot of people don't end up making these calls, and they've got a significant amount of call reluctance. I was actually at a client site last week, and they've got one of their inside sales reps that had been pretty much doing inbound, picking up the phone and doing inbound calls only. And we started going through the process of outbound calls, role play, developing scripts. I mean, this sales rep just fell apart. They just wouldn't do the role plays. They wouldn't pick up the phone and make calls. They had a serious conceptual call reluctance problem that they need to work through in order to move away from where they are right now. And I would say not only call reluctance, it's a call fear that drives a lot of salespeople away from doing this type of call. So what are some of the causes, right? I mean, you think about this, what's the worst case scenario? People, and a lot of people in sales have a high threshold of needing to be liked, for an example. And if we need to be liked more than we need money, or more than we want the sale, then it obviously always goes to the fact that, if somebody is not as cordial to you, or in some cases downright rude and mean, right, Leo? Leo's had a lot of these as of late. He's shared some of his calls. People can be downright rude and mean, and I've had a number of those as well. So worst case scenario, we get into this situation where we're in constant state of preparation, right? Research. I can't call anybody unless I know every single thing about them. Well, that hampers most cold calling efforts. And I know there's lots of discussion on places like LinkedIn on, hey, you really got to be an authentic. You really got to know a lot about your clients. You really need to personalize. The problem is, there's a trade-off to that, right? There's a cost to being able to do that. So, when you think about the number of calls and the volume that you need to make in order to find certain prospects, again, there's a trade-off to doing a lot of research, right? Again, we talked about need for approval. Anybody who we feel like we're interrupting, and you get a lot of people who just say, hey, why are you calling me, right? That impacts our need for approval. A lot of salespeople see themselves, if they make cold calls, they equate that with telemarketing, right? I'm not a telemarketer, so I don't make lots of calls, right? Well, you've got to get over the mindset of that being the equation you're looking at, right? Just because you pick up the phone and make cold calls by no means means you're a telemarketer. Actually, it's a lot different than that, right? And then, of course, our idea of lower business stature, right? Why I'm a sales rep, I'm calling into a CEO or a CFO or a president of a company or even a VP of sales or somebody in an organization. I'm a lowly sales guy and they're a high level executive, right? You've got to get over that, as someone who's offering a valuable service, something that really is valuable to your clients. And you have to keep thinking about the equal business stature. We're all just people engaging. And if we don't come at our sales calls with an equal business stature mindset, we are going to get into that servant subservient type of relationship with our prospects. And hence it's going to impact the nature of our calls. And it's going to actually be a hindrance to us making those calls. So again, the technical side of things, lack of cold call experience, lack of talk tracks that are not developed effectively, hence they're not effective. You don't really have a strong 30-second commercial that you've really refined over the course of time by A/B testing. You don't really know or understand how to do pattern interrupts to get people to listen to. And then you really, as Leo talked about before, the upfront contract and the outcome that you're looking for from a call standpoint is also a challenge for a lot of people. So call reluctance is very real, and it's a very big hindrance for most of us making outbound calls, and impacts us on our pipelines and ultimately our revenue generation quite effectively. So, I mean, you guys think about it. I mean, and I, the question that I always ask people when I go in and work with them on cold calling is really, what do you feel like the outcome is, for a cold call, right? What do we want? What's the purpose of even cold calling people? And again, we had a bit of a discussion with Nate before the call started, but from my point of view, the primary outcome that you want from a cold call is to set a meeting, right? That's the objective that you want in every cold call, because most people aren't going to be able to engage you when you call them, right? Don't forget, you're interrupting their day. Most people aren't sitting around waiting for random calls from people and being able to talk to them. So, if you think about the primary reason of what you're trying to cold call in order to do, that outcome is a meeting at some separate point in time, a point where they've set aside a few moments to talk to you, to understand what it is that you do as far as solving problems and whether or not there's a good fit. So if you go at a cold call with any other outcome in your mind other than setting a future time to talk, then it's probably, again, you have to start there with the outcomes that you're looking for. So Leo, I don't know if you have any, if you agree with that or not, but I think the primary goal again is to set a meeting and set some future time to talk.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think we've heard that before, where you want to go for the appointment as soon as you outbound someone cold. My experience is more about getting the business owner engaged in a conversation where really they're giving me valuable information. And lots of times I find my successful cold calls really are 7 minutes, 10 minutes, and even 15 minutes.
Sure.
And I know that the longer I am on the call with a business owner, the higher the chances are that we will have a secondary meeting. Because if I immediately ask him for an appointment 3 minutes into the call, it's very unlikely that just unannounced, and as good as I sound over the phone, that he's going to be able to apply half an hour or 90 minutes in just 4 minutes of a cold inbound.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, if you look at the data and the stats that come out of a lot of the companies that do SDR work, for an example, they will say, a good average cold call is three minutes or 3 to 4. Now I get it. You're on the phone a bit longer. And I do think that there are some real advantages when you get there, right? The challenge is it's hard for us to keep a lot of people on the phone that long. And there are ways to do that, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that, but yeah, a really good average cold call is about 3 to 4 minutes. But generally speaking, again, you can try to understand whether or not someone has a need for your service during that call, but it's almost impossible to diagnose a problem, right? Which is really important for us in sales, to diagnose a pain that our customers have without spending a bit more time on the phone to walk them through, for an example, a set of pain questions, for an example, right? To really determine if they have the need. So yeah, I get your point. I really do think that. I think the most important thing is when you're cold calling, make sure you have your outcomes established in your mind, right? It's very easy to get, when the bullets start flying on the call, it's very easy to get distracted and forget exactly what you're there to do. So whether your objective is to get the meeting, which I think should be primary, or whether you have some other objective as an organization, just make sure that that's clear in your mind and you talk to yourself about that every single call, so you don't miss that outcome that you're looking for, right? And so I think that's a very critical point, though. But yeah, it's a good point, Leo. So how do you overcome call reluctance, right? I know that that's not always the clear, but you've got to do a lot of you've got to believe, right? You've got to believe in your product. You've got to believe in your service. You've got to believe that you add real value to the customer. Because if you don't believe that at its core, if you don't believe your moral obligation is to find people who have a problem that you can fix, then you're going to struggle with making cold calls. So positive self-talk, right? Talk to yourself about why you're doing what you're doing, why it's important, how it helps people. Have well-defined tools, right? If your tools aren't well-defined and you're on a high wire and you have no support underneath you, you're going to get scared relatively quickly. You're going to lose your backbone relatively quickly, and that call is going to go off the rails relatively quickly as well. So make sure you have really good defined tools. Set small goals, right? If you're not making a lot of cold calls today, don't jump in and become Leo and make 50, 60 outbound cold calls a day. Don't set those types of goals for yourself, because you're not going to be able to do it. And then you're setting yourself up for failure, right? So set small goals initially for your calls. If you're doing 0 today, 1 is better than 0. It's 100% better, actually. So if you do 1 tomorrow and you start, walking up that ladder, you're going to have a lot more success than if you say, hey, I'm going to come out of this making, 30, 40 calls a day. And then of course, practice with your peers, practice with your, yourself in the mirror. It's really important for you guys to do practice on cold calling. You don't want to practice at the game. You want to practice during practice. So if you can do role play, if you can, again, practice with yourself, ask yourself tough questions and answer them, it's going to be really helpful for you guys to be able to overcome that call reluctance. Because even the practice strengthens the backbone and gives you more courage. If you're struggling with picking up the phone and doing it, there's just a few simple tactics that I like to follow. Love to hear Leo's, but pick up the phone, before you get in your cold calling hours in the morning. Call 1 or 2 people that do want to talk to you. Spend a couple minutes on the phone with them. Get that friendly conversation out of the way, and you'll be surprised at how much easier it is to pick up the phone and make that third call to someone who doesn't necessarily want to talk to you. So that that's a tactic. Pick up a brief story. I like to read stories of people who've really gone through a lot of hardship and triumph. Actually, I don't know if you guys have watched that recent documentary on the Iron Cowboy, who did the 50-50-50, right? He did the 50 Ironman triathlons, 50 days in a row in 50 states. And I keep thinking, man, I think I have it hard. That guy got up at every morning at between 7 and 9 a.m. and did 140 miles, 50 days in a row, right? So again, I mean, it's just read a story of hardship and triumph. It really kind of puts things in perspective for you. Go for the no, right? A lot of times you need to go for the no, right? Instead of trying to get a bunch of yeses on your call, just say, hey, I'm going to go out and get 30 no's today, right? And once you go for no, once you start getting those no, it's like click, click, click. I'm getting them off, right? So and then reward yourself, right? After your cold calling, blitz or your cold calling hours, do something you really enjoy. I don't know. Eat something you really enjoy, watch something you really enjoy. Just give yourself a little bit of a reward to say, man, I did that. That was tough. And I'm going to reward myself for doing it. And then find a partner, find someone to make cold calls with. I've sat on Leo's calls with him before. It's inspired me and it's got me really motivated to do the ones on my own. So find a partner. If you do it with 2 people, 1 call on, 1 call off, you get really motivated and you see other people, going through the same challenge you are. It's like being part of a team, right? So those are just some things that maybe would be helpful for you. And if you're really dealing with this idea of reluctance and things that you could be doing a little bit more to get you in the mood. So real quickly, I'm going to do pro number 3. I'm going to actually spend about 17 seconds or so. Thanks. I think, Leo just recently posted a couple things in the chat. So if you get a chance, take a look at those. I'm going to do the 3rd poll here for you guys. And give you 17 seconds to fill this one out. I have a well-written talk tracks that I use when cold calling. So those of you, I know that a lot of you aren't, but those of you who are cold calling, do you have well-written talk tracks at this point that you can use effectively and you feel like are adding value for the work that you're doing? If not, that's one of the things that you want to be able to do, right? And some of you are coming in. I mean, most of you have talk tracks that are written. That's awesome. Some of you do not. I always encourage people to write them down, because when you write them down, you can more easily recall them in your memory, and you can also test them out and rewrite them as you need to. They just give you that foundation of being able to read through them multiple times and gives you some muscle memory in your brain to be able to effectively execute that cold call. So again, even if you don't have them written today, take an exercise maybe and write the ones if you think the ones you have are really good, go through the exercise of just writing them down, share them with people, get feedback, and you'd be surprised that when writing them down, how much additional strength they actually have. So thanks for doing that. Again, about half of you guys have written and about half of you guys don't. So again, for the half of you that don't, consider writing them down. So thanks for doing that. What's the anatomy of a prospecting call? Let's talk through this real quick. I know we're kind of running a little bit late on time, but let's walk through, and this is an anatomy of a prospecting call from one of our training programs, our prospecting training program. And so Leo, I think, did a lot of this in his initial call, right? When you think about what we're trying to do, when we initially call people, what we're trying to do is get them to stop and think, right? If we sound like a traditional salesperson, if we call up and say something like, hey Leo, how you doing today, right? You know what that sounds like? It sounds like a sales guy trying to establish some bonding and rapport in the initial call. And you know what happens when, they immediately identify it's a salesperson with no pattern interrupt? Well, they don't even have to think about it, right? They just naturally go to the mindset of, hey, I got to get off the call, right? And at that point, they're not listening to anything that you say. So it doesn't really matter what you say at that point. You could be saying the best thing in the world, right? You could be giving them a free offer for the best thing ever. And you know what? A lot of people will decline it. They've actually done studies on this where, random calls to people or either random conversations started with people will reject really, really cool things for free because they think it's a sales call, right? And they just don't even listening to the dialogue in their mind. So again, you need to get them to think early on to keep them on the call, or otherwise they're not going to engage you. And that's really what a pattern interrupt is designed to do. It's designed to interrupt the pattern and designed to interrupt their thinking process so they don't say, that's a salesperson. I need to figure out a way to get them off the phone immediately, right? We also want to set up an upfront contract when we first call them because they want to know what this is going to look like in the next, whether they're going to be on the phone for 30 seconds or 3 minutes. They want to know what that's going to look like. Leo mentioned the term, mutual mystification, right? Nobody wants to be mystified when they're in a conversation with a stranger, right? So they want set expectations. They want clear outcomes that you want from that particular interaction, whatever that is. And they want to be able to determine if they can, get you off the phone quickly as well, if they don't like what you're saying. So all those things are outlined in sort of our upfront contract, when you initially call them, and it makes the transition from, the pattern interrupt to a conversation much easier. Leo outlined who and why he's calling. You want to make sure that you're doing that. And that's really the outline. That's really the focus of the 30-second commercial, right? Who am I? Why am I calling you? What are you going to get out of it, right? Don't forget, everybody's always thinking about me, right? What am I going to get, right? They're not thinking about you and they don't care about you. So if you go into this long story about, who you are, and focus on your why. Nobody cares about your why as a salesperson, right? At some point they may, but certainly not during a cold call, right? So be careful about how much of that call is about you. Think about how much of it needs to be focused on them. They also want, you got to want to have a clear objective, right? You want to close for an appointment, right? Generally speaking, or if your objective is something else, you've got to keep that objective in mind, and you've got to make sure that you focus on getting that objective accomplished, right? So, that's your target is I have an objective. I need to get that done on the call. And then you want to confirm, right? Whatever that objective is, whether it's a meeting, whether it's, exchange of information of some type, whether it's attending at, a lot of times you might want to cold call because somebody to have them attend a workshop you're doing, for example, like this. So you want to confirm what it is that you want them to do and how they're actually going to execute on that, right? So confirm. If I agree to attend your workshop, what does that mean? It means I've got to, as a salesperson, I've got to do this. I've got to confirm it. You got to get a follow-up email, and I have to understand if anything's going to get in the way of you actually attending, right? So again, get them to think, set expectations on the call, outline who and why you're calling, who you are, why you're calling, outline your objective, what you want from them, and then confirm that you've discussed that objective and that you are both on the same page on what's going to happen next. So that's really an anatomy of a good cold call. We'll talk a little bit more about the 30-second commercial. Won't talk so much about the other things at this point, but if you want to get a little bit more detail or dig into this a bit more, Leo and I can certainly get with you after this particular call. So a lot of times, we're going to be running into gatekeepers when we're cold calling as well. So Wanted to hit a little bit on gatekeepers because there are people designed to keep you away from talking to the people that you want to talk to or that you need to talk to. So how do we do that, right? So when you're calling a gatekeeper, one of the key things you want to keep in mind, you want to be confident, right? You want to be confident about who you are, what you're doing. So make sure that, confidence level is high, because if you sound like a salesperson on the call and you don't have that level of confidence, they are going to most likely, do whatever they can to prevent you from talking to the person you're looking to contact, right? If it's, hey, it's Neil Benedict for Leo Toledo, it sounds a lot more confident than, hey, this is Neil Benedict. I don't know if maybe can I talk to is Leo Toledo in? That type of thing. So you want to make sure how you're approaching the call, right? And make sure that you are very confident. Use first names, right? Use the person's first name you're calling. If you ask for the name of the person who picks up the phone, use their first name consistently, right? The most favorite word in the English language for most people is their first name. So as much as you can use it, do that. Just using their first name develops a certain level of bonding and rapport, and it makes you feel like, and it also makes them feel like you have some sort of relationship with the person you're calling as well. Direct the next step, don't ask, right? So a lot of times, we might say, hey, this is Neil Benedict. Put me through to Leo Toledo, please, right? Or please put me through to Leo Toledo. So giving them the instruction versus asking them if they'll do it is another technique. And it's not because we want to be rude to people. It's just generally speaking in psychology, when you tell somebody when they tell them directly versus asking them a lot of times, particularly for the gatekeeper, you get a lot more traction that way. Ask for help. This is sort of, maybe you'd see this as a, counter to what we just said. But when you ask somebody for help, that's another technique and tool that you might want to use. When you ask somebody for help, hey, I don't know if you can help me or not, and you're authentic about asking for help. A lot of times people want to, when you're drowning, they want to throw you a life preserver, right? They don't want to throw a rock at you, right? They want to try to help you whenever they can. So if that tactic works for you better, ask for help. Don't sell to the gatekeeper. Never get into a conversation about the gatekeeper of what you're selling. Never get into your pitch with the gatekeeper. Never try to get them to, understand what it is you're doing. Because at this point, don't forget, they're not trying to qualify you in. They're trying to qualify you out. So anything you're saying to them, they're looking for reasons to say no. We're not interested in that. And they'll make that. A lot of times, a gatekeeper will even try to make that decision if you try to explain to them what it is you're trying to sell. So never do that, right? Say please, right? Please is always good. Will you please, this is a technique in psychology as well, when they'll say, hey, will you please put me through to Leo, please, right? So, hey, Neil, will you put me through to Leo? Please put me through to Leo, please, right? It's an interesting technique, that we teach and we've taught people, and it can be quite effective, the psychology of doing please twice. And then try to limit your small talk, right? I mean, I know you're trying to build bonding and rapport, but what ends up happening is that, the small talk will set you off your goal. It'll distract you from what you're trying to accomplish. So it's okay to do a little bit of bonding and rapport, but try to limit it, right? Additional tips: always remain in control, right? Meaning that you're always trying to never give enough over information to the gatekeeper. Always make sure that you're trying to direct them to get you to the right place, right? So stay in control. Tonality is really important. Match the tone and match the pace of the person you're talking to. Keep in mind that, if they're loud talking, you can talk a little louder. If they're soft talking, you might want to lower your voice a little bit. If they're fast talking, speed up a little bit. If they're slow talking, match that as well. So keep tonality in mind. Tonality creates bonding and rapport with people. So, just make sure you realize what you're sounding like on the phone. And then try again, don't sound like a salesperson. Sound like somebody who belongs on the phone with the person that you're trying to get to talk to, right? Sound like somebody who has the authority and the in the ability to talk to the person you're trying to reach out to. Never sound, like it would be, super great, super helpful if you could connect them, but please, 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 right? Never beg for it. Just always sound like you belong there, right? And so those are things that you need to think about when you're talking to the gatekeeper. Leo, do you want to do a gatekeeper cold call?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
All right, I'm your gatekeeper. So, hi, this is Neil at AMC.
Oh, okay, wait. So then the owner of the company is John, right? And so
yeah, John's the owner. Yep. Sorry.
Okay.
John's the owner. You're trying to reach John. I'm the gatekeeper.
Okay. Ring.
Hello, AMC company.
Hi. Yeah, John Smith.
No, this is Neil. I'm the This is Neil. You're trying to reach, who are you trying to reach?
Oh, yeah. John Smith?
John Smith. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Um, can I ask who's calling?
yeah, sure. He's not floating around the office, is he?
Actually, I'm not sure. I haven't seen him yet this morning, but he may be. Can I
Uh-huh.
ask what this is in regards to and who's calling?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm telling Leo Toledo's on hold.
Leo Toledo. What's your company, Leo? Where are you from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fine. I'll hold.
Leo, what's the call in regards to?
Oh, wait. Forgive me. I'm sorry. Wait. So you're saying he's not there?
No, well, no, I don't know if he's here. I haven't seen him around the office yet, but he
Uh,
may be.
uh-huh. Well,
So,
if you just find out, I can just be put on hold for a few moments.
oh, yeah, so yeah, we can. What's the call? What do you want to talk to him about, Leo? What was the nature of the call?
Yeah, I mean, sure. So my name is Leo Toledo. But wait, forgive me, Neil. Would it be a better time for me to call back?
No, I mean, I think actually might be here, but I don't. What's the name of your company? I know you said your name, Leo, but what's the name of your company?
Uh-huh.
What do you guys do?
Yeah, listen, if you just tell him that I'm on hold, he'd be able to either get on the phone or not. It's really up to you.
Oh, okay. Hold on a second. Let me see if he's in the office. Okay, so now I'm going to go get him. Timeout role play. So let's debrief that call a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what you were trying to do.
Okay, well, to your point, first of all, I'm not ever giving the information to the gatekeeper because the gatekeeper can never say yes to me in terms of giving me an order or becoming a vendor of mine. So I can't tell her why I called. But what I'm doing is that I'm behaving assumptively where John Smith and I are colleagues. Yeah, tell John Leo Toledo's on hold. It's very assumptive. So typically my experience anyway, when I lead with that assumptive approach, very rare do they counter me and say, well, excuse me, why are you calling? Because if I sense some frustration, I can fall back and say, oh, forgive me, Neil. Did I catch you at a bad time? Did I interrupt you? Should I call back again? Because what I want is for them to say, listen, it's okay. Just bear with me a brief moment. Let me first find him or find her. That's been my experience. It shouldn't be too much of a hassle to get
Hmm.
through the gatekeeper. If it is a hassle, then I'll just say, okay, well, thank you for your time. I'll try back another day. And then I'll just hang up and call another company.
Got it. Okay. No, it makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I know we're running a little short on time. Great call, Leo. I mean, I think you really kind of a lot of pattern interrupts in there, sort of a lot of kind of helplessness, right? I think playing a little bit of a dummy on purpose, right? The dummy curve and playing a little bit of dummy is always a good thing, guys, when you're dealing with the gatekeeper, because again, don't forget the gatekeeper is trying to prevent you, keep you out, but if they feel like, again, sometimes they can either help you, or if they feel like you really belong on the call. And again, I think Leo's dummy curve, or kind of dumbing up a little bit, is a technique that can certainly help you when dealing with the gatekeeper. So if you have any questions on gatekeepers, shoot us a note in the text box, in the chat, and then we can try to hit those there. If you want to ask Leo a direct question as well, he's obviously going to be able to do that. So let's talk briefly about voicemails. I know we have limited time, and I'm trying to get you guys out of here. So voicemails are really important to be thinking about, right? Because they're going to be the end result of the majority of your calls, right? So if I'm making 100 calls a week, for an example, 80% of those calls going to voicemail, right? I'm going to be leaving 80 voicemails. So let's first establish our thought processes. I'm a big believer, and I don't know if Leo is or not, but I'm a big believer that you leave voicemails with every call, right? Because the human voice, when I pick up and hear a voice, right? If I listen to your voicemail, if I hear your name, that develops a little bit of a bond and rapport, even if I've never spoken with you, right? The human voice has that ability to resonate with somebody, and when they hear your name multiple times through voicemail, the obligation keeps getting higher and higher, because a human voice, equates you with a real person, and makes you makes you real. So leaving a voicemail, I think, is very important when you call people. And even though very few people respond to voicemails, as you can see, it's less than 5%. The idea of creating that voicemail is really, really important, right? Optimal length of a voicemail is between about 8 and 14 seconds. You don't want to leave long-winded messages because, again, people aren't going to listen to them. They're going to delete them. The longer they are, the less likely they are to call you back. But if you think about it, right, if the number of voicemail I'm going to get returned if I leave 0 is going to be 0, right? So again, think about the idea of leaving voicemails and make sure that you bought into the idea that voicemail is important. I mean, I know there's a school of thought, hey, keep calling until they pick up the phone, and that may be useful in certain scenarios. So, but most of the time, it's better to leave a voicemail because when you start leaving good voicemails, people will start returning your calls, right? And again, you're never going to go probably to double-digit call returns, but you can certainly get it up above that 5% if you're leaving good voicemails in general. So think about it. Think about how you're doing it, right? And when you're doing it. So leave a message almost always, right? I mean, again, it's just like any rule. There are always exceptions to that, but try to leave a voicemail. The goal, obviously, for your voicemail is a callback, right? You want them to get you to call them back. That's the only goal that you're going for, right? Nothing else. You're not trying to sell them on a voicemail. You're not trying to, convince them that you're trying to convince them to take any other action than call you back, right? The voicemail should be less than 15 seconds. So Nate asked me, what's an ideal voicemail sound like? Well, I'm just simply trying to get you to call me back. So I'm trying to create some level of mystery in the call, right? So here's a basic outline. The outline that I use and one that I've seen to be most effective. And then if you guys, and not only that, it's based on some data. So there's a sales consultant out of Toronto named Tibor Shanto. If you guys know Tibor Shanto, you should look him up because he's very data driven, excellent sales consultant, lots of great material coming from him. He's done a lot of research on things like voicemail. And, I really stole this from him. So it isn't invented here. It was stolen from Tibor. And what I end up doing too, and I've seen a great amount of success for this, is it's my name, the company that I'm calling from, the ability to call me back, meaning my phone number, and then I reference something related to that client. So if I'm calling into software companies, for an example, in Houston, I'm going to reference another software company that I've either worked with, that I know about, I've done a project for, that I've trained, and all I'll do is, and then I leave my phone number again. So it might sound something like this. Hey, Leo, this is Neil Benedict calling from Sandler Training. My phone number is 281-771-2876. When you call me, please reference VMC. Again, my phone number 281-771-2876. And that's it. I hang up. I don't say, please call me back. Never ask them to call you back. That's all I do is I leave that type of message for them. And what it does is they don't really absolutely know why I called. They do hear the reference, which, creates a little bit of mystery in their mind. And particularly if it's a company that they know well, or they've done business with, or they're a competitor of, they want to call back and understand what that call was regarding. So if the goal is to get them to call back, again, you've got to create that slight bit of mystery. You have to create that slight bit of, desire to pick up the phone and return your calls to really figure out why you left the voicemail in the first place, right? So that's really what it should be. Don't try to leave complicated voicemails because nobody listens to them, right? And don't try to sell anybody on voicemail because no one will listen to that either. And it actually gives them a lot more reason not to call you back if they know why you called them, right? So create a mystery, do something very short, very specific, ask them, leave your details, but don't even ask them to call you back. That's what has been, and when Tibor looked at the data and he used this voicemail, he got a significantly higher than 4.8 response rate. He got close to about 8 or 9% return on voicemails when he used this particular voicemail format versus another. So, this is really what you need to do and practice it, right? Again, just like anything, it's got to be practiced over and over again. But leaving a voicemail like this is really kind of where you want to be. Before we go, guys, I just want to outline the idea of the 30-second commercial. The 30-second commercial is really important in your prospecting calls because the 30-second commercial is really where the rubber hits the road and where you can communicate effectively. What they're probably in the 30-second commercial, you have to be thinking about it. You really have to guess or forecast where that person's challenges or in pains lie, right? You've got to be able to identify a couple issues for each of your clients. Instead of doing lots and lots of research on one particular client, we're doing really lots and lots of research on a market concern or a market problem, and we're identifying a couple of those reasons of why we might be calling, a couple of challenges they may be facing, And a lot of it, again, until we talk to the person, it's always going to be somewhat of a guess. You can really never really know until you talk to the person if they're struggling with the problems you think they're struggling with, right? Or if they know they're struggling with the problem. So when you outline and build a really good 30-second commercial with an introduction statement, a pain statement, the benefit, and then the hook question, you want to make sure that, again, it's really focused on the client, very in a very small way focused on you in your business, right? So just, this is a good outline of how to build that 30-second commercial. I know we're sort of, like I said, at the end of time. If you guys need any help, you want to reach out to me via email or reach out to Leo via email on how to do this well. We can help you kind of pull together a 30-second commercial for your needs. And that's kind of it. I know, like I said, we're kind of over time here. You guys all have my contact information.